What's going on, guys? Welcome back. This video is probably the most exciting video I've made yet. You can see a nice box behind me, and this is one of a few boxes that have made up probably the greatest delivery I've had. This right here is parts to the Ninja 250 engine that I will be swapping into the off-road go-kart. This thing's going to be awesome. Alright, so I'm just going to kind of jump right into the unboxing. This is not the engine itself. The engine itself is coming in a few days. This is some of the main parts that I can kind of start working on in preparation for the engine coming. Here's the exhaust header. Haven't got a muffler yet, but for testing purposes we'll leave it without, and then from there I'll pick something out, because obviously this thing's going to be much louder than the other engine, and I don't want to mess with any of the neighbors, so yeah, we'll see what we can do with that. Now we have a radiator. It's got a fan built in on the back, inlet and outlet port, temperature sensor, and the connectors for that, so that is functional. I'm probably going to mount that somewhere in the back. I don't want it too close to the seat for safety reasons. It's hot, fluids going through there, but we'll figure it out. It should work well. Our gauge cluster here. You can see speedometer in the middle, tachometer for RPMs on the left here, and then fuel gauge on the right. Turn signals, high beams, neutral light, and low oil level light, and a reset for the odometer there. So I probably won't have anything hooked up to the fuel gauge for a while. There is a sensor you can get, but I'm not sure how I'd make it work with my fuel tank. So for now we'll leave that off. Speedometer, I'll look into that. I haven't quite figured out exactly how I would hook that up and make it work properly, but we'll see what we can do. All the lights will be functional. If I choose to hook up lights, that'll work. Probably won't end up with any turn signals, but the neutral light will definitely come in handy, and the fuel or oil level light will be helpful as well. The RPM gauge, the tachometer, that will be useful. That will feed right off the engine, and I'll get RPMs, and that's super important for shifting and driving in general. So yeah, this should mount really well, right kind of above my current dashboard. It should fit nicely and not interfere with the view too much. Here's our fuse box, another electrical component. Next up we have our carburetors. This probably my favorite part out of this order here. Hopefully they'll work well. I got to do some research because I'm not super familiar with larger displacement engine carburetors, especially 2 in series here. Voltage regulator. And the last thing in this box is my coils. Obviously 2 coils. It's a 2-cylinder engine. So that's it for this box. Like I said, I have a bunch more stuff coming. Wiring harness, the actual engine itself, the starter relay, kill switch / start switch, the key switch for the engine. I have a bunch of Heim joints coming for a steering modification that we're making. Yeah, we have a thermostat and a radiator cap, which will hook into our coolant system. And some point down the road I'll definitely make a trip to an auto parts store, get some wiring, more fuses, coolant hoses. I'll replace all the hosing on the carburetor just because I don't want to risk anything breaking. And then we'll have to make our engine mount. So there's a lot of work ahead of me. I got to clean the engine. It's a little bit dirty, but I've been assured that it will run, so that's not too much of an issue. And just a lot of learning that's going to go on here because I'm really not familiar with these types of engines, so we're going to see how it goes. Okay, so this video is kind of going to go ahead of schedule, I'll say, on the build. I'll be honest with you, a lot has changed since the last video. I'll give you a quick rundown, but we have a total redesign of the suspension systems, really. Same general design, but new Heim joints. As you can see in the video, the push rod suspension is all metal with nice 1/2-inch Heim joints in there. I have a third connecting arm, you can call it a tie rod, hooked up to the rear A-arms there, which gives me adjustment of toe. I have adjustment of camber. Jack shaft has stayed the same, but I have more bearings on the way because I'm going to add a third to reinforce it. I was getting some flex in it. I added a chain tensioner to the system. I did a 3-inch lift on the back of this go-kart. New axles. What else has changed? I have the old engine completely out, have the seat out, and the biggest change probably is the fact that I took out the differential and made it a solid rear axle. I really thought that was going to make a huge difference, but it really didn't. I enjoy the drive better without the differential in there. And the reason I took it out is actually because it broke, but maybe somewhere down the road I'll rebuild it better, but so far I'm loving it just as a solid axle. And with the 35 horsepower or so that this engine is going to give me, I'm really not concerned about it at all. So what I'm going to do in this video is skip over all that stuff. We'll go back to it later and I'll show you all of it, I promise. But in this video, I'm going to start I'll try to mount the radiator, maybe work on the gauges, do stuff like that is really going to make it easier to get this engine installed quickly. I'm on kind of a time crunch, but we're going to see what we can do along the way. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the radiator. There's a couple things that I want to play around with. A is the fact that I don't want to run incredibly long hoses to this radiator. I'm not quite sure how strong the water pump in the engine is, or how long these hoses should really be. I know on the motorcycle they're very short, so I'm going to try to keep them as short as possible. That means that this is probably going to mount somewhere below here, around this area. It should give me plenty of airflow, hopefully. When someone's sitting there, it won't have direct flow, but all the air coming in through the sides and stuff will kind of get channeled back here to some extent, and I think it'll get plenty. Plus, it's got that fan on the back that can always suck some extra air in. There's other ideas I have for adding extra airflow if that becomes necessary, but I doubt it will. So I'm thinking I'm going to mount it right around here. Now the other question I have is if I were to mount it normally, the fan would be on the back sucking air through, not blowing it in, which is okay. But the outlets for this radiator are on the back. That means the hoses are going to have to be a little bit longer to bend around and go down towards the engine, which isn't necessarily too bad of a thing. But I have seen people flip these radiators around, flip them the other way, and you can either flip the wiring so that the fan spins in the opposite direction, or you can actually take it off, fix these tabs here, and mount it on the other side. For now, I'm thinking that the hoses pointing in that direction will be perfectly fine. In fact, I think I actually like it better. If one were to let go for some reason, the fluid would be pushed out towards the back of the cart and not towards the driver. So I like that idea best. I think I'm going to work on mounting it right around here. Alright, so you can see I took the time to add 4 tabs here. Nice rounded off tabs. I welded them up, however, I'm also going to probably add gussets to these just to prevent them from shaking back and forth. You know, this isn't going to be taking a huge amount of stress or pressure or anything like that, but it's always nice to have an extra security on tabs like these. So I'm going to go ahead and mount up the radiator so you can see what it looks like. Okay, so now that the radiator's all mounted, next up we're going to move on to mounting the gauge cluster. We're going to put that right in here. I think sitting at about there would give me a good view. Unfortunately, the steering wheel is going to block some of it, but you'll be able to see the tachometer really well, and you know, moving your head a little bit to see the rest of the gauges. So not too big of a deal, but unfortunately if you put it any higher, it'll constrict the view. If you put it any lower, you're still never really going to see it through the steering wheel like in a car. So I'm happy with that positioning right about there. Okay, so I have the 2 lower mounts built now. You can see them right here. Branches out and then up. And those have holes drilled in them. There's an identical one on the other side. And those are going to hold the bottom 2 mounts of the gauge cluster. Hey guys, it's like Christmas over here. All the parts came to do this engine swap. Have the massive engine right here, carburetors, radiator cap, thermostat, tachometer, coils, the rest of the gauges, voltage regulator, fuse box, radiator, more Heim joints for the front suspension, pod filters, key switch, start switch, 4 bearings to reinforce the jack shafts, wiring harnesses back here, that's going to be a mess. What else do we have? Exhaust. That's about it. Everything is ready to go on. I took some time, I cleaned up this engine. It cleaned up really nice. I haven't noticed anything wrong with it. So yeah, we're gonna get into it. I already made mounts for the radiator here and the gauges, so those are already on. Next up, we're gonna work on an engine mount, and from there it's just plugging everything in, installing it, finishing up the wiring, and it's done. So let's get into it.